Okay, so it's time for a film review. It's been a while since I've made a film review. As I say with all of these, disclaimer, I am going to be talking about the synopsis of the film and discussing the film. So if you haven't seen it, just bear that in mind. I will say, though, this is now a 23-year-old film, so it's not a film that's on current release. And the film I'm going to be discussing is this Natural Born Killers. Now, before I bought this, I got it in a discount shop, CEX, which is a company that trades in secondhand DVDs. Anyway, before I bought it, I'd sort of been intrigued by it, but I'd never seen the film in full, so I got it, and it's one of those films that sort of got me captivated from the first moment. The reason for that was it was the first time I had heard the Leonard Cohen song "Waiting for the Miracle." Now, I do emphasize this point because a good film, a strong film, is a bit like a strong book. Just like in a strong novel, the opening line is very, very important. Well, I think in a strong film, the opening scene or the opening music score is very important. And with this, that was honestly the first time I'd been very familiar with Leonard Cohen's work, but that just, the late, great Leonard Cohen. It's probably not even his best known piece, but I think it's beautiful, it's haunting, and yet it's completely and utterly unique in terms of it just fits the scene perfectly. And yet, although it's a romantic piece of music, arguably, it can only fit in a film like this. So I just think that was perfect choice for the opening scene. So if you're familiar with Leonard Cohen's Waiting for the Miracle, you'll know the sound of that. So try and imagine the context. This film is basically, I was going to say modern, but a 1990s take in a sense on Bonnie and Clyde. It's basically about a couple that go on a rampage, a crime rampage, um, and they are professional criminals, but they basically go through. The scene starts in the New Mexico desert, um, with Leonard Cohen's waiting for the miracle in the background, and this couple, um, Mickey and Mallory Knox, arrive at a diner, and a couple of rednecks come in and sexually harass Mallory. She flirts with them at first, but then basically you see their nature. They basically take out the rednecks, playing eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Um, just the way this whole scene is done is very powerful. There's one bit in the scene where there's a scorpion kind of just on the road. It's just a split second, but you see the rednecks truck drive over it, and it's at the very second in the song where it says, I think the line is, "You wouldn't really like it here," and the timing is just perfect. It really fits. It's captivating. It's you kind of know something's about to happen. It's just a very powerful scene. So, like I say, this is sort of a modern take on Bonnie and Clyde in that sense. But basically, the director is Oliver Stone, and the lead roles are Woody Harrelson as Mickey Knox and Juliette Lewis as Mallory Knox. Um, Juliette Lewis would go on the following year to be in Basketball Diaries. Woody Harrelson would go on to be in such films as Welcome to Sarajevo and um, the boxing film. I forget its name right now, but um, again, those two actors were perfect at this role. It's very difficult to see anyone else doing it now. There's possibly a few people that could pull it off, possibly Johnny Depp, and possibly for the role of Mallory, I guess. Um, there's a few actresses I could think of, but it's one of those things when you associate someone with the role. It is very difficult to see anyone else doing it. Anyway, that's it. They go through America, the West, just carrying out spree killings. Police officers, an Olympian who's cycling past, just anyone that gets in the way, basically, they are clinical psychopaths. There is a backdrop to it that Mallory came from an abusive family, and sort of flashback to it. it's done in a soap opera context, almost like it's a sick comedy. Her father's basically a pervert and a fat slob and really just a horrible human being. Um, but that's kind of the backdrop, and then Mickey's background. There's not so much allusion to that, but he too came from an abusive background. Um, what Oliver Stone said in the extras, I've just watched the interviews, is that he basically let himself go. There was no censorship, no self censorship in this film. So anyway, that's sort of the first act in a sense, where they go through um, the country causing mayhem, Bonnie and Clyde style. The next act, in a sense, they're in a maximum security prison. And another important character, played by Robert Downey Jr., is a very seedy reporter who himself is a bit of a dark character. And his role is quite important because it really comes into the emphasis of what this film is about and what Oliver Stone was driving at. I should say the film was released in 1994, same year as Pulp Fiction, and it was one of the most controversial films of the 90s. There were scenes of graphic violence. Well, pretty much everything you could think of was thrown into this film: sexual violence, rape, um, mass shootings, you name it, it was in the film. Um, so it's quite a dark film. There's bits that are almost touching on satire, on dark humor, but it's a film that's very. I can certainly understand why it was controversial, but one feature of the film is a chaotic style. I'll come back to that. But anyway, this CD reporter follows him around, and the backdrop of this is that America by the 1990s had become a country desensitized to violence. And this very much applies today, which is why I think the film still applies today. There's a desensitization. And the trailer for the film shows that Stone had made historic films about the Vietnam War, about the Kennedy assassination, and so on, about Richard Nixon, Watergate, all that. In fact, there's a brief reference to Richard Nixon at the very start. In fact, if you look at the film, there's very, very subtle references throughout the film to history and to popular culture. But the film is basically a statement on the hypocrisy of society. That on one hand, people say, "Oh, these are awful people, they're scumbags, let's put them to death, etc." And yet the media turns them into celebrities. And I think there's certainly some truth in that today. Take, for example, whenever there's a mass shooting, the media probably spends a lot more time analysing and discussing the killer than they do the individual victims. And it's not just America, I think this is probably true the world over. Um, I think it's legitimate to discuss the killer and the motives, but I think what Stone was touching on was there was a certain degree of hypocrisy in in especially conservative positions on crime, but then TV ratings boost these people's ego. Um, so that was what the film was driving at. The critics were very harsh on it because of the violence, but as Stone says, they maybe overlooked that point. Um, there's one scene in the film where it shows kind of fans of Mickey and Mallory all over the world, in London, in Paris, in Tokyo, glamorizing them. And there's one scene with some young American teenagers, and they're sort of saying, "Oh, well, we don't condone violence and all," but the guy's got a kind of sinister grin on his face. Anyway, the ultimate scene in the film is a riot in the maximum security prison started by Mickey, and the prison governor is played by Tommy Lee Jones, and that scene again is very powerful. It's very thing about this film. You shouldn't watch this film if you've got epilepsy. It's a very fast paced film. It's kind of chaotic. That's one aspect I still have mixed views on. I understand why Stone went for this angle, but at times it was almost too chaotic. There were scenes which were kind of shot in a way that was like it was anime, or I guess in the 1990s, animated would be more appropriate. Just chaotic. The choreography of the film was very chaotic, and yet the storyline wasn't that complicated. But the way the film was shot was quite chaotic. And if you see the film, you'll know what I mean. There were scenes that almost didn't make sense. Um, but the general flow of the film is ABC. They go on the rampage, they're caught, and it ends up in this prison riot, and they take the journalist, well, the sleazy journalist, this guy is no regular journalist, hostage, and his final lines are, "But wait a second, you always leave one person alive, and he's pleading for his life." And then they kind of point to his camera and they shoot him. And the catch is, well, you're a hypocrite because you have fueled our killing spree. And it's just a very shocking and memorable film. Um, I think personally, if I was directing it, I probably would have done a few things differently. However, I do give the film credit for definitely for that opening score. It's an opening, in my opinion, as good as Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction was probably got more acclaim than Natural Born Killers, but I would equal them as films. Um, like I said, Woody Harrelson, Juliette Lewis were perfect at the roles. Um, it is a violent and shocking film, but as Stone says, that's not the point. The point is to sort of point out the hypocrisy of a society that, on one hand, condemns these people, on the other hand, basically encourages them. Um, I mean, these sort of sensationalist TV shows, America's Most Wanted, and we have equivalent shows in the UK. Maybe not quite as sensationalist, but it's definitely there. I mean, the British equivalent would be the tabloid press, the way they sensationalize the sickest crimes out there. Um, and the thing about killers, these sort of killers, is a total lack of human empathy. Therefore, they're not going to look at the coverage and think, oh, what a terrible person I am. I heard actually about a case, and not to go off on a tangent, but I heard about a case in, I believe it was Louisiana. There was two serial killers operating at exactly the same time. One of them had killed six people, the other had killed four or five, and the latter actually was jealous of the former because their tally had been higher, which is really messed up when you think about it. But I guess it was that's symbolic of the desensitization of society. But when you look at trash like Jerry Springer, which basically glorifies family breakdown, which glorifies um, troubled people's lives, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Springer's a total parasite. And I know there is the argument that a lot of it's staged. The thing is, I think some of it isn't. Certainly in the case of the Jeremy Kyle show, it's definitely not staged. Kyle is a class A parasite as far as I'm concerned, and also a massive hypocrite, given his own very less than angelic personal background. But it's just a memorable film. Um, the chaotic factor, I do, like I say, I understand why Stone done that. Sometimes it's, in my opinion, a little too chaotic, and I personally probably would have directed it slightly differently in certain scenes. But the prison scene, you can't. The chaos absolutely fits into that because it is a riot, and it's kind of playing this kind of Arabic. There is a name for the song, I forget the name, but it's kind of Arabic chanting music in the background, and somehow it perfectly fits because it's this brutal prison riot, just like what we've been seeing in Brazil in the past few weeks. And basically, the snitches are being lynched, and it's just all hell is breaking loose in the prison, and it really works. Tommy Lee Jones is a desperate man trying to keep the situation under control. So it's just a really interesting film. And it's interesting, I came across this film, I watched it for the first time probably early last year or in late 2015. And the great Leonard Cohen passed away last year, so that's a little bit of a coincidence. Um, that's it. That is my view on natural born killers. Incidentally, the whole argument about art versus violence, I more or less agree with the filmmakers that, like Woody Harrelson said, it's difficult to believe someone could watch a 2 hour film and then decide to become a serial killer. However, I take a slightly different view with rap music. I think that when you have rap artists specifically talking about killing homosexuals and raping women and glamorizing that, I don't think that's non influential. So I don't entirely agree that art has no influence. But I also think that, I mean, if you're going to make a film, say, about a violent subject, it seems ridiculous to me not to depict the violence. Quentin Tarantino's often been criticised for that, but if you're going to make a film about slavery, make a film about slavery. Don't hold back. If you're going to make a film about war, again, directors like Mel Gibson get criticised for the gore, but that's what war is. I don't think you can, you know, censor the reality of what something is just because people are going to be shocked by it. Okay, good. That's the reality. And film is meant to not depict reality exactly, but certainly portray a depiction of what we interpret reality to be. So there is a lot of philosophical points from this film. But there you go. Natural Born Killers, directed by Oliver Stone. If you've seen the film, let me know your thoughts. Do you think it was a good film? Do you think it was a great film? Do you think it was awful? Why? Any thoughts on the actors? Thanks for watching.